Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, we'll talk more politics, as is our usual want, the politics of race. For the last several weeks, a debate has been raging over the Boston Latin School and the racial atmosphere there. There's been an investigation, and now U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz is threatening a civil rights probe. Of course, Superintendent Tommy Chang has been cooperating, but says it's not a problem. Joining us tonight to talk more about it is the president of the Boston branch of the NAACP, Michael Curry. In the neighborhoods, I'm Joe Heisler, your host, and in the second half, we shift gears to the politics of race, and of late here in the city of Boston, a raging debate taking place over, of all places, the Boston Latin School. Of course, that is the top exam school here in the city of Boston. Well, a couple of young ladies posted a YouTube video suggesting that the atmosphere there was one of animosity towards students of color, and set off a debate here in the city, in the community, amongst leaders, and now apparently amongst the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is going to be conducting a civil rights investigation. And pleased to have joining me a gentleman who's never shied away from coming in and talking about what's always a difficult issue for a lot of people. And around this in particular, he's done a lot of work as well. I'm talking about Michael Curry. He's the president of the NAACP Boston branch. And Michael, it's always nice to have you here.
Always good to be here.
Well, was it as simple as that? Just a kind of a YouTube video that kind of set this thing in motion, or was there something else there? Is this something that's been building for a long time? The Boston Public Schools, more than 3/4 of the students are students of color. Mm-hmm. Not so the Boston Latin School. I don't have the exact percentage. I kept trying to, but it's considered the elite public school in the city of Boston. And how did we miss this, or did we miss it? Is it a real thing? Is it a real problem? What did you find out?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that, and I think about the sort of the unrest across the country when it comes to racial tension. So we think about the criminal justice issues. There were activists and advocates who knew already that police were using unnecessary force, and that there were deaths at the hands of law enforcement. Similarly, there were advocates, including the NAACP and others, who felt that there was a disparate disciplinary policy within Boston Public Schools, and quite frankly, charters, Metco, you name it. Yeah. And that there were also issues of racial tension in all of those systems, and heightened within certain schools. Boston Latin School is no exception. The reality is that Maggie and Kylie, what they did was, I've described that as the smoke. What the smoke led to the fire. So when you talk about racist tweets, whether they're students, former students, or non-students, but that the Boston Latin community was sort of participating in what was racially offensive to the black students in the school, that led us to some really egregious examples of disparate disciplinary practices within the school. Mm-hmm. Not new, but I credit Maggie and Kylie. They were the folks who climbed up the flagpole, so to speak.
BLS Black was the kind of banner that or organization. I don't know if it's a formal organization, but now I've got to ask you this because, and for those that haven't been following, this has been a really interesting story. There was the school department did an investigation, and according to them, there were a half dozen, 7 potential incidents. 6 were handled appropriately, according to Superintendent Chang, who was here last week, incidentally. Mm-hmm. Then I know the community kind of did their own investigation as well, including the NAACP, the Urban League, some others, and called for the resignation of the headmaster there, Mrs. Teta there, and then subsequently, of course, The mayor chimed in, said wasn't a problem, and superintendent said not a problem, but we're working on it, we're open to it. Then the U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz saying that indeed they were going to investigate, and I think that was at your request as well. Did it have to go that far, or and when you first started digging around, is this what you thought might happen and what you had in mind?
Yeah, so I think it's important for your viewers to understand sort of the timeline here and the severity of the issues. So one is you had a young woman, African-American girl, who was threatened in class in late 2014. A student basically said to her, called her the N-word and had a cord in his hand and made a comment about lynching, right? She felt threatened. When the school got involved, they did not call the parent of the young lady. They did not call the parent of the young man and basically dismissed it as, well, you just stay away from each other. We know that there are other incidents that white students and others claim that black male students did a threat and that they were suspended or the attempts were there to expel. So that's the disciplinary practice at the school. So a threat against a young black girl was not handled the same way. So that's one. Two is the tweets, that whole post-Ferguson tension that existed within Boston Latin School that led to the binder of tweets that was delivered to the headmaster that, quite frankly, she failed on responding to. One, she should have investigated it, and it seems like she wasn't timely in that process. And then two, just convening a conversation in the school. It says that racial bigotry, that racial hatred wasn't going to be tolerated in the school like she would respond to any other issue that had tension within the school system. So we're talking 2014, not handled well through 15, didn't notify parents. Come 2015, almost mid-2015, the parents find out that their daughter was threatened. Did not get answers from the school, and quite frankly, were being dismissed by the school. And that led to them really feeling some anxiety about this school, which quite frankly, the mother graduated from.
Right. And if I understand right, was part of the Alumni Association.
Exactly. Very active, helped them through their accreditation process. But what's interesting is think about the threat. Threat, November 2014. The first time Superintendent Chang appears to have heard about this incident was when we told Becky Schuster, the head of Office of Equity, and then she informed Superintendent Chang. So Headmaster Mooney Tata at the school didn't feel it was necessary when there was this heightened scrutiny about racial tension at the school to call her superintendent and say, you know what, there's another case or cases I should probably tell you about. There's another case of a teacher referring to a student as she walked into class, what's up, my N? And during a lesson plan on Huckleberry Finn, and she thought that was appropriate. And of course, we've had to say to people when they've not understood that is say, well, what if a male teacher has said, what's up, B? Or based on sexual orientation, someone has said, what's up, fag? These terms are offensive, and there is we call that cultural incompetence, to think that you could say that to a student. And quite frankly, the young lady that we've talked to this week was offended and felt like she could not raise the issue because her grades would be impacted.
Well, and I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here because, of course, the superintendent was hearing, and he didn't say it's much ado about nothing. As a matter of fact, he said, we need to work on this. But it didn't rise to the level that he thought the headmaster needed to resign. He did say that he would fully cooperate if there was a federal civil rights probe, and indeed, 2 days later, it was announced. But
well, that's problematic.
Did the administration, the mayor weighed in as well and said he didn't think it was necessary to go that far? Did they drop the ball? They missed something here? Were they not aware of?
So what's disturbing in that, of course, and I've known the mayor for years. I've developed a great relationship with Superintendent Chang. I don't believe they'll be in the same place soon. I believe that history will catch up, or the truth will catch up, and eventually they'll have to say this headmaster failed. Because quite frankly, this is not the only incident. Even if it was just the incident where a child was threatened, where it wasn't classified properly as bullying, it wasn't identified as a racial threat, it wasn't proper notification to either of the parents, there was no follow-up with the young lady, there was repeated taunts by the same young man against this young lady. So if we're talking post-Columbine, post-Newtown, and a teacher and a headmaster an administration that doesn't take threats seriously, doesn't follow up and says, oh, okay, kids will be kids. But then I think as the truth will come out, there are other incidents where African-American students were accused of less egregious incidents and were expelled or suspended. So I think the issue there is, to me, that headmaster needs to be terminated. In other districts, and I ask your listeners who may live in other places, if they were in a place and they said, my headmaster in my school did not protect my daughter, did not notify me, did not classify it as a potential crime, as really a threat, and then I find out about it months later, I have no doubt that no matter where you are in the Commonwealth, people would be asking for that headmaster to go. So it's a little disturbing to me that our administration hasn't gotten there yet, but I ultimately believe they will. It's about trust, and we have to have faith in a public school. It's not a private school.
Yep.
This is our premier public school.
Well, I was going to say,
faith.
this is the best and brightest, and so supposedly you'd like to think that the level of discourse there would be even more civil than it might be in some other places. And of course, to talk about lynching has some real historical connotations, none of them pretty as well. And
so, it's a threat. People got to remember, it's a threat.
Now, what did you talk to the mayor about this? Did you talk to the superintendent? What did they say?
Well, I mean, this conversation goes back a year, right? So we've been communicating with the Walsh administration going back to February of last year. We asked for an investigation into the incidents, post the tweets at Latin School. We had just done that with Latin Academy, my alma mater, just a year prior to that, where administrators, teachers came to us and said that there is discrimination at Latin Academy. We engaged the Office of Equity. The Office of Equity did a thorough investigation, and now there's a new leadership team at Latin Academy. For some reason, there was not the same response at Latin School. The Office of Equity was not allowed to be engaged to the level they were at Latin Academy. There lies the rub, right? It's a year later, and now people are scrambling. A report comes out that finds almost executive summary, makes it seem as if the girls had overstated the issues at Latin School. I think the more people hear from the Britton story, the young lady who was threatened, the more they hear about some of the other incidents that are now starting to come to light, people will realize that the U.S. Attorney's Office of Civil Rights was warranted in saying that they wanted to come in and take a look at this. They're looking at other incidents. Was that
at your request?
It was a group of civil rights organizations, ACLU, Mass Advocates for Children, NAACP, Urban League, New Democracy Coalition, a few ministers, all got to the point that we said, this is not being handled appropriately, and we need now a third party, an outside entity that has the investigatory power to look really even back as far as they can at incidents.
And not an isolated incident.
Correct.
Well, now we go to, and I'm thinking of Tommy Chang, and he seems like a really good guy and bright guy. He's a person of color himself. Does he not get it?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think, you know, the history.
Marty Walsh got elected in large part. The swing vote was really the community color. Does he not get it?
You know, I think folks sometimes need to be walked to a point where they get it, right? I don't think that it's malintent. I think that sometimes we as advocates have to say, one, we have more information than you do. Here's a case that you didn't know about, that you should have known about, that your headmaster should have told you about. We now have two other cases that we're looking back, including one in 2008, where a black student was slashed in the face by a white student at Latin School, was never reported to the police, at least no police report. The student was never suspended or expelled, white student, and there was no appropriate action it takes against that young man because kids will be kids, I know the family, he's not a bad guy, versus when it's an African-American student. So to us, this is really unraveling a culture, a pattern and practice within that school that says if you're black or brown and you do something, you'll be dealing with a harsher sentence or a harsher penalty than if you're a white student. So that is a concern. I think the politics sometimes plays on this, the protectionism that exists around Boston Latin School. Some of the cities and the state's most powerful political leaders are graduates of Boston Latin School. Yeah. It's a super-majority white school, and I often refer to it as apartheid-like. Super-majority white in a minority-majority school, minority-majority district, a minority-majority city, and people still treat it like a private school. It's not. It's a public school, and it should be accountable for the incidents of racial tension at the school.
Well, and your organization obviously has been investigating these kinds of practices and allegations, charges for well, over 100 years.
Right.
But I'm wondering if in this kind of, I don't know how I'd describe it, almost, given all that's taken place the last couple of years with Trayvon Martin down in Ferguson, Black Lives Matter, the discussion that's taken place around that. Have we kind of become hypersensitive to these kinds of things, more so than we might have been? Because, as you've said many times when you've been here before, this stuff has been going on for a long time. It just never saw the light of day.
Frederick Douglass had a quote. His quote is, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will." So what this speaks to is it speaks to a culture, a climate that's existed in law enforcement, in education, and in other areas of society for a long time. I think what you're finding is you're finding a generation of activists who are not as
willing
willing to accept the gradualism, willing to look the other way, willing to wait on someone to have the moral compass to say, let's deal with this and let's eliminate the taint of race in our institutions.
Well, and maybe it's shocking to some people because, of course, when with President Obama, Governor Patrick, a lot of people suggesting that we're in a post-racial society, where, and I think some of them surprised that it keeps popping up. Well, I would say that it's there, it's everywhere. But maybe isn't that true to a certain extent? And it's popped up in the presidential race. Let's say it's not far out of the consciousness. There's a little bit of what's that? I can't remember who it was that said a little bit of racism in everybody. Have we had in this kind of heightened atmosphere? Does it kind of exacerbate it and kind of make it a larger issue? And I'm not trying to minimize it in any way.
No, I think it's a good question. I think, again, I've used the phrase that it's truth catching up to history, right? Is that it's not about minimizing it. It's about finally embracing that it exists. It's an uncomfortable conversation. It requires, it's about power and privilege. It's about a history of neglect and abuse. And if we can, as a society, and this is what most shockingly disturbs most of us as activists, particularly black activists, is that our biggest challenge is the progressive. It's the liberal. It's not the Ku Klux Klan member. It's the liberal who doesn't want to address racial tension. It's the liberal who won't hire people of color. It's the liberal who says, well, if all those black kids pulled up their pants, we wouldn't have to beat them up. Or if they didn't look so threatening, we wouldn't have to shoot them, right? These are things that people say, and you can turn on your television and hear this sort of rhetoric out of the mouths of citizens. And these are not what your typical white sheet wearing people would say. This is, or the typical white shirt people would say it, these are liberal folks that are really caught up in this racial tension because it's forcing them to address something that they've never had to. And I think that's where we're seeing in America now, is that quite frankly, a generation of 40s and 50s and downs are saying, no, it's time for us to have an honest conversation. I'm gonna lock the door, and you're going to sit here and have a conversation with me about how we did not have access to health care, how we did not have the pipeline to the middle class, how we've been undereducated and forced into poverty. All these things that are historically factual that finally people are making us have a conversation about. And Boston Latin School, quite frankly, opens the door to a broader conversation on achievement gaps, on the precipitous decline in African American and Latino students at that school when they changed the entrance policy, the admissions policy. It's about disparate discipline. And hopefully that conversation moves from Latin School to all of BPS, to Metco, to charter, to these private schools, because it's everywhere.
It's just, I'm thinking, and I remember when he came in when he just started, and I said, whoa, you're I'm talking about Dr. Chang. I said, you're you're stepping into it here. You know, this is there's a lot of issues at play, and politics is a blood sport, a contact sport here. Are you ready for it? And he said, you know, yeah, you know, I'm. Is he ready for it? And you trust this guy, and you think he can, you know, bring everybody together?
You know, I have faith in Dr. Chang. I've met with him many times. I know his leadership team. Makiba McCreary is chief of staff. I've met regularly with Becky Schuster.
And now he's brought back Mr. Holland.
Yep. Al Holland is now in the school. Yep. You know, I give people the opportunity, right? Because all of us needs the opportunity to try to figure out the right way to do it. But what I have to remind the superintendent and the mayor is our jobs is to push you, right? Our jobs is to make you have the uncomfortable conversation. Our job is to add the urgency to the issue. And hopefully there's a mutual respect for that, is that our job as advocates is to say, no, achievement gap today, not tomorrow. Today is, let's hold the headmaster of Latin School accountable now and not wait on us, the administration, to catch up a year from now and say, you know what, we really should have done something different about that, because if that was our child that was threatened and we weren't called and it was not handled appropriately and the police were not involved, we would ask for her to go.
Well, again, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I've got to ask you this, because talking about this atmosphere, you know, this heightened kind of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, yet we see the presidential race playing out, and of course Steve Jarding was here earlier, we were talking about it, where you know, some of the candidates, and the one in particular seems to be appealing to elements that don't want to go there, and as a matter of fact have the exact opposite view, aren't looking to. We're talking, of course, about Mr. Trump, and what happens if there's a guy like that gets elected? Does that set us back in race relations? We're just completing over 7 years now with President Obama, who's attempted, I think, fair to say, to bring everyone together. What happens if there's a President Trump? Are you fearful?
Yeah, it terrifies me, and I've had a chance to have this conversation quite a lot frequently recently, because he has the dog whistle politics. He plays in the race. He talks bigotry and racism, and as your previous guest just said, he could switch it up tomorrow. But the problem is, if you could say it, then you could act on it. If you embrace it, then it should terrify all of us that could be embedded in your policies and how you treat people. And who you hire and who you put in key positions, what kind of a Supreme Court justice you put in place. So we should all be vigilant to pay attention to what he's saying as a candidate, and our vote should speak for themselves. We're a nonpartisan organization. I pay attention to the Republican race. I pay attention to the Democratic race. But his candidacy, quite frankly, terrifies anyone who cares about justice and equality, who is an enemy of bigotry, because he plays on all of it. I've also said that.
Does it potentially energize voters, you think?
Well, I think it does. I think one of the things, and I've said this recently, is that he reawakens America that bigotry is still alive and well. Because too many people thought we were post-racial. Too many people thought, well, people don't think that way anymore. That's the way of our grandfather and grandmother. The reality is he's bringing out droves of supporters who do not have an issue with his reluctance to denounce David Duke or the Ku Klux Klan, his equivocating on what he said and what he would say, who would support him and who wouldn't. They don't have a problem with that. And that should make all the rest of us say, you know what, we need to mobilize to make sure that our vote says that that's not the kind of person we want in office representing this country.
I think even many mainstream Republicans are repudiating him for that. We shall see, of course, all of us watching very closely, and watching also as well what the outcome of the investigation is, and what happens, and hoping for improvements all across the Boston Public Schools. As always, I enjoy having you here. Michael Curry is the president of the Boston branch of the NAACP, perhaps the most storied civil rights organization in the country. I think no doubt about that, and doing a great job of leading it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming in and having us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. You're watching Talk of the Neighborhoods. We're here tonight and every week at the same time. We'll be back next week. Until then, for the entire staff and crew here at the Boston Neighborhood Network, I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.